Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and today's video is a quilt story about a graduation quilt for my oldest daughter, and I still have a lot to say about it. My eldest daughter graduated high school in May, and it's kind of a tradition in our area that high school seniors or graduating seniors get a graduation gift from their parents. And it's usually like, well, this has been 30 years ago, but when I was graduating high school, a lot of people got a really nice watch or some piece of maybe jewelry or ring or just something, kind of meaningful. And I don't know that I want to say fancy, but just, kind of one of those life cycle important, spend a little bit more money and get a nice gift for your senior that's graduating. And not everybody does that, but we wanted to do something nice for our daughter. And so my husband and I had been talking about it and what she might like and was there anything that she needed for college? And ultimately we just said, well, why don't we just ask her? And so we asked her and said, what would you like as a graduation gift? And she said, a quilt. And of course I was pleased as punch, and very happy to do that. One of my favorite people on the planet. And so of course I wanted to make a quilt for her. Our oldest daughter is a nature lover, even though she's not very much like a hiker or an adventurer, but she has always, from the time that she was very, very small, just noticed things about nature. So we would be running late for church on Sunday morning, and as a little toddler, she would be walking to the car and go, look, a dandelion, and would stop and have to look at the dandelion. One time on the way home from school, we pulled in the driveway and 30 yards away, she sees this gigantic caterpillar on the side of a tree. And she's the one that when it's rained a bunch is just thrilled to the gills that there are mushrooms in our yard. She kind of also likes that color palette. So she loves olive greens and all of the greens and browns and just kind of almost the same colors as the fall quilt that I recently made. And so I wanted to make a gift for her. I wanted her graduation gift to be a reflection of her. So if you're a giver of quilts, a maker and giver of quilts, you know that the best quilt gifts are the ones that really meet that person where they are. I could make the quilt that I would love to have, and knowing my eldest, she has a very generous spirit. She probably would love it anyway. And she would fawn all over it, even if she was lying through her teeth. But I wanted her quilt to be her quilt. And so here we go on the hunt for the fabrics. So, and by the way, I have actually talked about this quilt on a video already. It's been months now, so you've probably long forgotten if you've seen it, but it's a great quilt pattern, and the quilt pattern is Scrappy Triangle Quilt by Penelope Handmade. And I featured that quilt and talked about how great it is for men's shirts, and it really is. Then I have another video that includes pieces and parts from this quilt, and that was when I made my own print fabric for this quilt. So gosh, there's been a lot. I've talked about this quilt a lot on this channel. It's been months ago because quilting is slow. But I wanted her quilt to be a reflection of her. And so it has lots of greens and golds and surprising number of orange. And I'm excited to show you the backing. And I wanted it to be something that she loved so much and that she would have hopefully for a long time. So I made it big enough to go over her twin bed and didn't change the pattern, but did the bigger size for that purpose. So let me stop and I'm going to spread it out so you can see it. And I'm going to talk about some of the different pieces and parts and how we got here. And so you can celebrate with me this finished quilt. So here is the quilt, and it's big enough that we're not going to be able to spread it out all over. So we're going to have to do this in maybe sections. This quilt obviously you can just tell, it's a whole series of half square triangles. And so it's a 4x4 block of half square triangles, and then it's just blocks and blocks and blocks. This is kind of the wrong order to talk about this, but it works for my mind right now, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. What I found when I went to do the layout, so I made each of the blocks, and there are 2 of each color. And when I went to lay them out, I had the intention of having it a random pattern. Nothing next to the exact same color and just a real random assortment, which is really laughable because I don't do random. I actually made this other whole quilt, which I'll have to do a quilt story on that. And I literally used the graph paper and drew out the whole thing because I just can't do random. Because if 2 of the same greens ended up beside each other, then that was not going to work. So I tried every combination of random. Obviously, if I tried it, it's not random, but you get the point. And there was a more golden and orange and kind of this pumpkin and almost into tan than I was remembered when I was making it. And every combination that I did, it felt like the orange stuck out instead of the green, which is actually more her favorite. So I got the youngest together with me in our living room, and we tried everything under the sun. And in the end, we decided to put all of the greens together in the middle. And I'm pulling so you can see it. You're probably hearing the rustling, but the greens and the blues, because when it's on her bed, the center is, I think, probably going to be the part that she likes the most. And what we did is it's kind of a gradient. So it actually is tessellation. I don't know if you remember that from high school, but it's a pattern, and if you rotate it, it's the same pattern rotated. And so it does this kind of semi-spiral in rainbow, ending with the blue and green, and then that whole half, you take that and turn it all the way upside down and around. And so it's kind of like a mirror image of itself. I don't know if it's probably not going to be where you can see it. So let me fold it back. But this quilt has a lot of fabrics that have a lot of meaning. So I bought this kind of olivey limey green, and it has little bitty trees all over it. It was one of those fat quarter on a whim things at one of the big box stores, or the impulse buy candy counter at the local quilt store. And I liked it so much. And actually my oldest I made face masks during the pandemic, and she wanted a mask from that and loved it. And so I saved some back and used it here. There's I call it a golden sprig. It's a shirt that has little golden sprigs on it, and it pairs nicely with another fat quarter that I had. Actually, I don't know if you've seen my other quilt story videos, but there was a time that I bought a grab bag of fabric from Crimson Tate, which is a online and local quilt store, and then I bought another stack of fat quarters, and it was called Harvest Bundle from Sarah Handmade. And I did it because I was needing to be stretched, and I felt like my fabric stash just needed something new. And so several of these fabrics came from that Harvest Bundle. So this kind of orange and light orange is a warp and weft, if you're familiar with that line of fabric. There's this golden, there's another one here that looks like a little baby Ohio star. There's batik in this quilt. There are some fabrics that I picked up at random places. My husband and I did a day trip to Huntsville, which is a city nearby, and we just stopped on a whim into a quilt store that's owned by a college friend's aunt, and I bought this red and the kind of low volume with little red flowers in it. So it just has a really wide assortment of fabrics, and a surprising number of them, of course, because it's me, are shirt fabrics. And so some of the whites are shirt fabrics. I did make a couple of the ones to go with the green, which is the how to make your own printed fabric using markers video. So I made little frog emojis right here to go with this green batik. I did a green polka dot on a white shirt to go with this darker green that looks like ferns up close. It's really pretty. The dark green of this block is a shirt paired with a very, very faint gray grid. There's a lot of shirt fabrics in this. There's a tattersall that I really like. There's a really funky little blue paisley. I mean, it's me. I have to use the men's, dress shirts because honestly, that's what my stash is made up of. But it's just a really interesting mix, and I wanted it to be a reflection not only of her, but also of me. And we bought together. My oldest daughter and I bought a lot of these shirts on thrift store runs together. So there are memories there. There's a gray with a little orange polka dot that you won't be able to see because it's so fine. And then there's another tattersall with black and orange, which would have made a great Halloween quilt. So she just contributed a lot, actually, with shopping. And of course, when we bought those fabrics, we had no idea it was going to be in a quilt for her. It's funny, I talk a lot on this channel about wanting my piecing to be perfect and wanting all of my corners to line up and my nested seams and all of those things are still true. I 100% want them to be just so. But as I put the blocks together, of course, some of them did not line up perfectly. And so when we got it back from the long arm quilter, I noticed, oh my goodness, these are a little further off than I remember. We actually just got it out of the dryer a little while ago, and it crinkled up so nicely, and I was kind of surveying the whole quilt to make sure I had got any loose threads so I wouldn't spend this video picking little threads off of the quilt that I'm talking about. And I noticed where those half square triangles hadn't come together, and I laughed because if I had not been literally looking at every square inch for loose threads, I would have never noticed it. So just another installment in you do your best because we want to do good work, but at some point you can't tell, and the person who gets it doesn't care. When I was getting ready to decide what to do with the quilting, originally my daughter asked me to quilt it as well. She really actually wanted me to quilt it. And it's kind of big. And as you may know from watching this channel, I have a lot of projects going at the same time. And also in the middle of all this, changed jobs. And it just became more than what I could do to actually do the quilting. And she was great about it, of course, and was like, I understand, Mom, because I kind of did I need to break it to you, like, I hate to tell you, but if we want this done in the next year, I'm not going to be able to quilt it. And the reason she didn't want me to have it quilted by someone else is she said, I don't want it to look like a computer did it. And I thought that was so interesting because I think my home base is actually, I like it when it, maybe not a computer, but when it has that level of quality. That's what we'll call it. She wants it to look handmade. This is the kid that saw the dandelion getting into the car. She likes the personal touch. She likes the imperfections, and I love that about her. And this is the kid that at the thrift store goes, just get it, Mom. So when I decided that I was going to probably need to have it quilted if we wanted it done in this calendar year. And so then it was a matter of like, okay, what quilting design? Because I wanted it to be, again, reflective of what she likes, but also have that, if we're going to have someone quilted and it's going to be done by a computer, let's have it be a design that has some variation in it so that it's just not the same visible pattern over and over again. And again, for those of you that are watching, you know that there is custom quilting, custom long arm quilting, which I have also done. But in the interest of time, I use my local quilt store and they do the computer quilting. So I picked a oak leaf pattern and we enlarged it so that it's actually kind of big. So the oak leaf is like this. I don't know if you can see where I'm tracing. So the size of my hand, and then there's just the little trails and swirls off of it. And I think it ended up being a wonderful suggestion, and I'm glad we chose this particular pattern because it does, in fact, feel not like a computer has done it. And because it's a little bit bigger, it's a little puffier, it's a little more crinkly, and it doesn't have that tight, dense quilting. And I think that was something that, just knowing her, my other child and my husband really like that bumpy, lots of, maybe not super dense, but like where you run your hand across it and it goes bump, 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 bump. They love that. But my oldest is more like me. She likes the drapey, soft. It's not as important for her to do that feeling across the seams. So that's why I went with a bigger quilting pattern. And I actually also used cotton poly batting this time. I generally use 100% cotton. And I think maybe I overlay my own expectations on some of my quilt projects. I'm sure you've never noticed that about me. But I like for blankets that I use in quilts to breathe. I'm sure it has something to do with my age and stage of life. But I don't want it to smother me. I don't like to feel hot underneath it. And so I like these natural fibers. I like 100% cotton and linen. And I like that cotton batting as well. But the cotton poly, that 80-20 blend puffs up really nicely. And I knew that that was what she likes. She likes a puffy, drapey kind of quilt. So went with that. And then I guess I probably should tell you about and also show you the backing. I have mentioned on Quilt Stories about piecing backs versus solid backing. For this quilt, I considered doing a pieced back, but in the end, I really wanted that nice kind of continuous print across the back, and because it was a splurge for her. Sometimes I don't splurge on backing fabric because it can get expensive, especially if you do a fairly large quilt or a bed-size quilt, which this one is. But it was worth it to me because it's in celebration of her graduation. So I looked and looked, trying to find something that would marry well with the colors in the front and in some way be a reminder of what she likes. And so I looked at mushroom prints, I looked at flower prints, I looked at all kinds of, there's one that I almost bought that was a wildflower. It was lovely, but in the end, I fell into what I think is the perfect fabric. I'm going to turn the quilt over and show it to you. It is very green. It is a very, very green print, but if you could see it up close, it is a whole, it's a forest. It's the woods with little girls climbing trees and swinging on swings and chasing little cats that are up in the trees. There's one that just is peeking through the tree. There's lots of flowers and birch trees, and it's everything. It's everything. It's just like her, just this little girl that's exploring nature and loving it. It is a directional print. Do you know when you take on a quilt project and you get to a part and you think, oh, this part's easy, and then you realize, not easy. This was one of those parts. Because I had bought the fabric and I bought extra just in case, I thought, oh, well, all I need to do is just, put the two stretches of fabric together. And that is what I did. But I realized that I was going to have to match up the print. And, well, I guess I could have not. I could have just left it. But I wanted it to match. The actual repeating print is big. So it's not like every 3 to 5 inches. The whole entire print repeating is like 20 inches. And so I laid it out one night with the intention of like matching it up and cutting it and sewing it together, and got stymied. So I had the quilt top done for, I don't want to really admit this to myself, months. It really didn't take all that long to do. It took longer to find the fabrics than it did to make the quilt top. Once I got all the fabrics, the quilt top came together fast, which that's pretty common, isn't it? It's like you think that sewing it is the thing that's going to take so long, but it's really not. It's a lot of stuff leading up to it. And then the quilt top very often comes together really fast. And then I know a lot of quilters that fold their quilt tops up and do I'll get to the backing and the quilt sandwich later. And from what I understand, there are a lot of quilt tops out there that are unfinished. So I had the quilt top together 4 months, and then, got stalled out with the backing, finally got the backing together. And then, of course, there's the decision about the binding. And I love these quilts that I see online where people do striped binding and all this fun binding. And I looked at the front of the quilt, and I looked at the back of the quilt, and I just couldn't bring myself to add another interest piece into it. I just wanted something that would tie them together and make it feel harmonious and not call attention to the edge piece. So we decided on brown. I took the youngest with me to the local quilt store, and we found what I think is the perfect brown fabric. And it's got a little bit of variation. It almost looks like it's got denim or it's been distressed. And when we laid the bolt of fabric out on the sewing table at the quilt store, we both just did this like, oh, like, yes, that's really it. So made the binding, put the binding on it, and I've been doing that for the last few days, trying to get it together. So I machine stitched it to the front, was getting ready to do the hand stitching on the back, and the thread that I picked was so perfectly matched to the fabric that I kept losing it. Like I just couldn't see it. So I would do a stitch, and then I would have to hold it under the light to find where I needed to, and then do several stitches, and then hold under the light. And God help me when I got to the end of a thread and I had to do a new one, because it's like I had to feel to. So that's a good sign when you lose your thread because you can't see it on your backing fabric. And then of course the last and final part was to put a tag on it. And so let me show you that. So I did something new with this tag. I generally put my tags in the corner, and I don't attach them. I attach them with the binding just on the corner, and then the corner piece or that diagonal is loose. Or I've done the kind that's just like a fiddle flap on the edge. But I didn't want to do that for some reason. And so I just wanted to put a good old-fashioned tag on it, just a white, it's not exactly square. And I put "Made with Love for our daughter" by Mom, graduation quilt, and then the date of her graduation. And my intention was I didn't want to have to do the turned edge like a applique. So my intention was to use the fusible interfacing and face the white fabric and then attach it with the fusible interfacing to the quilt. But I didn't have any. I didn't have any double-sided interfacing, and I was unwilling to go to a big box today and buy some. So I just fused it to the white, wrote the stuff on there, and then did a hand zigzag stitch around it. And when I tell you this is the most rustic hand zigzag stitch. I had a moment when I started where I was like, should I mark where all of the apexes of the zigzag should go? So that way, like, every 1/4 inch or every 1/8 of an inch, and then mark that all along and have them precise. And I talked myself out of it because I know that our daughter, this is the kid that didn't want the computer long arm quilting because it's not imperfect enough. And so I just eyeballed it, and it's raggedy. But it's actually really sweet and endearing too. And so I used that same brown thread that I used for the binding, and I just doubled it up and made my own little zigzag stitch. And it's definitely handmade. It's definitely eyeballed. But honestly, I think probably it'll end up being one of her favorite parts of the quilt because I just winged it. And if she's my wing it girl, just like the little frog emojis, I was really worried about it, that she would grow out of her love for little frogs and nature-y things. And she said, "So what if I do, Mom?" And I was like, "Well, when you get older, I want you to still love it." And she goes, I will still love it. I might look back and go, "Oh, that's when I loved frogs, when I was 18." And she's right. She doesn't have to love little frog faces when she's 35 to still love a quilt that I made for her when she was 18, when she graduated from high school. So I always do this in quilt stories. But anyway, yeah, that's how we got here. And I've had it now for months and months. It's been about 6 months. Again, quilting is slow. And sometimes you get those bumps in the road, like job changes or backing fabric that stalls you out, just like me. And isn't that just part of the process? And isn't that part of what makes it beautiful? And sometimes when the final quilt is done, there's very little fanfare. It's not nearly as exciting as when the quilt top comes together, in my opinion. And yet, the final step is maybe the most important one. So that's that. I hope you've enjoyed my story of my daughter's graduation quilt. It's taken me a journey. It's been a journey to get here, but I'm so pleased with the final quilt, and I hope you've enjoyed being with me. This is the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. Thanks so much for watching.